Hey, I'm going to tell you something your biology class definitely skipped. It's a little unsettling, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Here's a question almost nobody asks correctly. Most people ask, why do we age? As if aging were a thing evolution built, on purpose, like a self-destruct timer. That's the wrong question, and it leads to the wrong answer every time. But aging isn't really one thing. It's a bundle of specific diseases, cancer, Huntington's, the whole list, that evolution had every chance to edit out and chose not to. The right question is stranger and much more uncomfortable. Why did evolution never bother to stop it? Natural selection is supposed to be relentless. It edits out anything that hurts survival and reproduction, generation after generation, with no mercy and no exceptions. So if aging is so obviously bad for you, if it makes you weaker, sicker, slower, more likely to die, why hasn't millions of years of ruthless editing simply deleted it the way it deletes almost everything else that's harmful? In 1952, a British immunologist named Peter Medawar gave the first real answer, and it has nothing to do with aging being useful. It has to do with evolution losing interest. Medawar pointed out something almost embarrassingly simple once you see it. Natural selection's power isn't constant across your life. It's strongest before you reproduce, and it functionally collapses afterward. A genetic problem that kills you at age 6 gets ruthlessly edited out of the gene pool. That individual never reproduces, the gene dies with them. A genetic problem that only causes damage at age 70 gets a free pass, almost every time, because by 70 you have already passed your genes to the next generation. Evolution already got what it wanted from you. It stopped watching. Evolution didn't fail to fix what's hurting you. It never had to see it, because you'd already reproduced and passed your genes on. Call it the selection blind spot. Every species alive has one, and it opens at a different age depending on how the species lives. But for a wild ancestral human surrounded by predators, famine, and infection, very few individuals were living long enough for natural selection to have any reason to police anything that happened past, roughly, the age of having and raising children. Whatever genetic damage happened to show up after that point was, evolutionarily, invisible. Nobody was checking. That alone explains a great deal. But a second researcher, the American biologist George Williams, noticed something even darker hiding in that blind spot in 1957. And it's the part of this story that should genuinely unsettle you. Williams proposed that some genes don't just slip through the blind spot unnoticed. Some genes actively trade on it. A gene that gives you a real advantage early in life, more fertility, stronger bones, better immune defense in your 20s, can get aggressively favored by selection even if that exact same gene causes serious harm decades later, past the point selection is paying attention. He called this antagonistic pleiotropy, and once researchers started looking for real examples in the human genome, they found them. Take the gene p53, one of the most important tumor suppressors your body has. Early in life, p53 is a bodyguard. It catches cells that are mutating dangerously and shuts them down before they turn into cancer. That's an enormous early life advantage. But that same aggressive cell-culling behavior, sustained over decades, also depletes the stem cell reserves your tissues need to keep repairing themselves efficiently in old age. The same gene that may be quietly protecting 25-year-old you from cancer is, by most current models, contributing to 65-year-old you running out of repair capacity. One gene, both effects. Selection only ever graded the first one. Or take a far harder example, the gene that causes Huntington's disease. Huntington's is a fatal, degenerative neurological disorder that typically doesn't show symptoms until someone's 30s or 40s. And once it does, there's no cure. By any reasonable logic, a gene that guarantees a fatal disease should be stamped out by natural selection almost immediately. Researchers studying carriers of the Huntington's mutation have found that, earlier in life, the same gene is associated with measurably better cognitive performance, faster motor function, and larger brain volume in childhood and young adulthood. Selection saw the 20-year-old with the sharper brain and rewarded the gene. It never saw the 45-year-old paying for it. That's not cruelty. It isn't even a design choice. There was no designer in the room at all, just an editor who read the first few chapters, liked what he saw, and never turned the page again. This is, genuinely, one of the more disturbing ideas in evolutionary biology, because it means some of what's currently breaking down in your body, right now, might not be random decay. It might be the unpaid bill on an advantage that was already spent and collected decades ago in a currency you never got to see. Here's where the story takes a turn that should change how fatalistic you feel about all of this. The selection blind spot is not a universal law carved into biology. It's a consequence of how long a species typically lived in the wild, and where that changes, the blind spot changes with it. Look at elephants. A full-grown elephant has roughly 100 times more cells than a human, and far more cells should statistically mean far more chances for one of them to mutate into cancer over a long lifespan. By the raw math, elephants should be riddled with tumors. They are not. Elephants get cancer at roughly the same rate humans do, or lower, a puzzle epidemiologist Richard Peto first flagged decades ago, now known as Peto's paradox. The reason researchers eventually found: elephants carry roughly 20 separate copies of the p53 tumor suppressor gene. Humans have one. Across evolutionary time, in a giant body where cancer risk from sheer cell count became a serious enough threat to a long-lived, slow-reproducing animal, selection didn't ignore it. It patched it repeatedly with backup copies of the same gene humans only got once. In other words, evolution can act on late-life problems when survival into old age actually matters to a species. It just usually doesn't bother, because for most of evolutionary history, in most species, almost nothing lived long enough to make it worth the trouble. And then there's the naked mole rat again, the same hairless rodent that lives over 30 years with almost no detectable aging at all, no rising cancer risk, no measurable decline in strength or fertility for almost its entire adult life. Spend your whole evolutionary history hidden underground, mostly safe from predators, and the blind spot never gets the chance to open as wide. There's no decades-long stretch of selection isn't watching, because individuals routinely lived long enough that selection never stopped. So the honest version of this story isn't evolution designed you to fall apart. It's something closer to evolution edited the chapters of your life it could see and stopped checking the ending, because for nearly the entire history of our species, almost nobody lived long enough to need an ending checked. You are not malfunctioning. You are living in chapters nobody was ever grading, including the diseases on that list with your name on it. That's the part worth sitting with. The blind spot isn't fixed, and it isn't a verdict. It's a record of how much attention an indifferent process was willing to pay to a part of your life it never expected you to reach. You reached it anyway. What you do with the unedited chapters is the only part of this story that was never evolution's to write.